Hello, my name is John Dillon, and we're here to talk about Apex programming. Today's topic is exception handling. First, we'll start with what is it? Exceptions are things that happen in our system that we don't expect, but we have to deal with them one way or the other. So the concept of exception handling is that we handle these things in a way that's appropriate for what our system needs to achieve. Some examples of things that might go awry is if we're pulling back some data and we're expecting it to be there, but it's empty or null, but we treat it as if it's not, we might have a problem. It might throw an exception. Maybe more commonly is if we are talking to another system, if that system is down, if we don't anticipate that, we could definitely run into some problems. So that's where exception handling comes in. When we've got something that might occur normally, not every system's going to be up 100% of the time, and we just have to figure out ways that we need to deal with that. And most languages have support for handling these exceptions, and Apex is no different. And if that doesn't make sense, hopefully it will by the time we're done today. So first, let's take a look at some code. We're going to look at the basic syntax of exception handling in Apex. Again, this may look a little weird at first if you haven't seen it before, but it will make sense once we put it into a real example. So first we start with try. Basically, the intention is we're going to try to do something and hope that it works. So that's what falls into our try block. But if it doesn't work, we can catch an exception. So what this is telling us, again, in the try block, we're going to try to do something, and we'll put in some activity here in this block. If something goes wrong, we will catch it, and what we catch is an object that's an exception object. And we can call it anything. This is basically just a variable. A very common practice is to simply call it E. And then once we're in the catch block, this is where we can actually do something to handle that exception. And the way we handle it will vary based on the context, whether we're in a trigger, whether we're in a Visualforce page, the nature of the exception. It is possible to catch more than one type of exception, and we're not going to go into that detail since this is just an introduction to the concept. For now, we're just going to assume we're going to catch an exception. So that's the basic structure. Now let's take a look at an example of one, and we'll use the example that I mentioned earlier when we're trying to reach out to another system, and if that another system is not there or is down for some reason. So what we have here is a very simple Visualforce page. What we're going to do is reach out to a system called CatFact, which gives us random information about cats. So if we press this button, we should get a CatFact back. And here we go. We've got a fact about cats that shows up. We're not going to go into the details of how this page is working, but what I do want to look at in the code is how we are accessing this URL, catfact.ninja. So that's working fine, but just to simulate us not being able to reach it, I'm going to mess up this URL with, to make it bad. And then when we go back to our page, if we press this, of course we get an error. As you can see, this error that gets thrown up on our Visualforce page is not very pretty. You might have to dig in to figure out what's going on with it. And if our users see this, they're not going to know how to handle it. So the point of exception handling is we should be able to take this error that we're getting and handle it in a way that's better and doesn't just trash our application. So let's take a look at how we could handle this a little bit better. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of how we're grabbing things from that other website. But what we can do, what we really need to be concerned about is this call here. We get our message in this call, get from website. So here's where we can set up our exception handling. We can try, and what we're going to do is try to make this call. And if it works, fine. But if it doesn't, we want to do is catch an exception. And here in our block, our exception block, we can handle it in a way that's a little bit better. So we've got a couple options for what we could do here. We could simply log it, and we've talked about logging in the past. And here we can just dump out the contents of the exception. Let's take a look at what that looks like. If we refresh our page, okay. So now notice when we click this button, nothing happens on the screen. But if we look into our logs, we can see we did get the error, encountered an exception, and this is the details of that exception, which as an administrator, hopefully we would be able to troubleshoot that and figure it out. We could even look right here and say, oh yes, this URL is bad because it's got an X in there that we don't need. But still, we would like to do something a little more pleasant. While this isn't as bad as that error message we saw before, it's still not good to have our users click a button and absolutely nothing happens even when there is an error. So one of the other ways we can handle it is to put an error message onto the screen. So I'm not going to dig into all the details of what's going on here, but this is a mechanism where we can put error messages onto our Visualforce page. So we add the message, we're telling Visualforce that it's an error, and we're using e.getMessage. This will give us just the message from our exception. There's a whole API on exceptions, which I'm not going to go into. Just be aware that it's there, and you might explore what other options are there. Get message is usually enough for us to troubleshoot what's going on. And then here in this debug, we're actually dumping out the whole exception, which includes lots of other information. So now let's see what it looks like. So here, when we get our cat fact, it's a little bit better. At least we haven't totally lost the whole page, and we do get the message unauthorized endpoint, and we can see that we've got something wrong in the URL. Now, of course, this is being shown to the users. They may not know what to do with this, but if they screenshot it and send it to us as admins, or at least tell us that there's an error, we can jump into the logs and see the more detailed message if there is one. So that's exception handling in a nutshell. Again, the syntax is we try to do the thing we're going to do, and then if it fails, we catch the exception and we handle it in the way that we want to handle it. Now, the specifics of how you handle it, again, is going to be different depending on your situation. One thing you never want to do is you catch an exception and simply ignore it, because then it makes whatever is happening very, very difficult to troubleshoot. So if you're gonna implement exception handling, then you really have to handle it. You have to do something in here, even if it's simple logging, or in this case, a way to get the message back to the user. If you're not handling it, then you're simply ignoring it, and that's not a good way to go. So, all right, I hope this has been helpful to you, and that you know a little bit more about exception handling in Apex and how it works and what the syntax is. If you have any questions on some of the details that I didn't go over, feel free to ask them in the comments, and perhaps that'll be part of a future video, or if it's something small, I can answer it right in the comments. If you're new to Apex, or even if you've been doing it for a while, I recommend that you check out my free mini course on Apex patterns and anti-patterns. It gives you good tips on things to do and things to avoid when you're programming in Apex. And that's it. I will see you next time.